I'm Tony Russo from On Death Care, and this is The Rest, funeral service news for the week ending Friday, March 20th, 2026. Got a bunch of stuff to go over this week, but before I do, I want to invite you to subscribe to my newsletter, On Death Care, where I do all my original reporting and send it to my subscribers. It's also available on social media if you follow me on like LinkedIn and stuff like that. But if you'd like it delivered directly to your inbox so you get it first, the best way to do that is to subscribe. And if you have the time, the money, and inclination, I send extra stuff to my paid subscribers, and you can find out about the paid subscription bonuses and all of those things at ondeathcare.com. But for now, let's get into it. Many of the stories this week are kind of revolving around some of the things that I reported on in my coverage of SCI's recent JP Morgan presentation. And again, if you haven't read that, there's a link to my story in the show notes. But if you were subscribed, you would have heard it already. The short version, my headline is actually probably enough to let you know what the story was about. It said, SCI doesn't want your building, only your customers. They haven't, it would be wrong to say they scaled back acquisition, but it would be right to say what they're talking about more is building up their pre-need funds and doing a better job at getting in touch with celebration of life people and kind of developing the business they have more deeply than expanding in the ways that they have in the past. There's probably tons of reasons for that. I think we're all a little nervous about private equity, money coming in, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But what was really interesting was they made that announcement on the heels of a big funeral home renovation they did in Florida. And that one was, we turned these 3 kind of dowdy funeral homes into these light celebrations of life. You've seen how these stories go, but they're tacking that onto a push for more and more aggressive pre-need sales. They want to start selling into markets where they're adjacent. They want to go into your backyard, which is their words, and that's where they want to poach families from. No, they just want to sell them. They want to sell them, and they have this rigorous training program that they're using to do it. I go back and forth. People may say that homogenized funeral, that going back to a homogenized funeral experience is not necessarily what people want. But to those people, I would say, have you passed a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A at near a mealtime and watch how people sign up to get something that is exactly what they want and will not disappoint them, although it won't make them spectacularly happy either? That's one of the things we're best at here. So I wouldn't slough off this notion of re-homogenizing funeral service, right? You can get a salad at McDonald's. Whatever you get at McDonald's, I can tell you it will not impress you, but it will not disappoint you. And that is how to become king in America. So before, we shrug off this notion that SCI is just, homogenizing and no one's going to want that, I've got bad news for you. I think that they do. And that's just the first SCI story, because the other one I want to tell you is tied in with 2 other stories that I'll get to in a moment. Earlier this week, Tukios announced that it had added a music beta to its to some of its websites, an AI music beta, excuse me. And I reached out to them to make sure that people got their licenses, and they do, and that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit. We have all been burned. I don't know if we've all been burned. I know I've been burned a lot by it's almost like a licensing scam. You have these guys with synthesizers in their basement cranking out hours and hours of unremarkable music and selling it to licensing people who make you rent it from them for $100 a month or whatever they charge, $118 a month, $7 a month. I don't know what it is. It doesn't matter, because it's a scam. Because eventually they lose a license or you lose a license or they raise their prices and you want to switch over, and then all of this music that you had. And again, this is not, you know, this is unremarkable music. It is supposed to be unremarkable. It's stuff that's less distracting than elevator music. The idea is that you play it in the background of memorial videos, or, you play it in the background of services during your live streams and stuff like that. And so the I'm not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fear person when it comes to AI, but I'm not a huge fan either. I think that the trade-offs are, I think walking in with your eyes wide open on the trade-offs is important. And in this particular case, I think the trade-offs are fantastic, because if you use AI generated music and you get the license, it's really yours forever. And that means that no one's going to take it from you. No one's going to change, services or whatever. Or if you do change services, the license is yours. And then AI music is really difficult, even if you know what you're doing. I barely know what I'm doing. The introduction to this show is AI generated, and it is a snippet of a really, really awful piece of music that I was able to generate with AI. And that's what you have to. It takes a lot of futzing around just to get something that is just okay. But if you're looking for background music, what you want is just okay. You want the Chick-fil-A of music, I guess we'll call it. So I'm very excited about this opportunity for funeral directors. And if you are a Tukios subscriber, or Tukios runs your website and your tech, I think that that's a really nice bonus. But there was something else in the newsletter that I wanted to talk about, because it did have association not only with the SCI story, but with something I've been growling about for a good 3.5 years, which is, if you have a boring website, you are out of reasons to keep having one. One of the things that Tukios does is they have an AI photo generator as part of their website, which means that when you get the standard website, you don't have to leave it alone. You don't have to have some patrician guy in a spring sweater, smiling at his wife, and have them all be clearly people who you do not know. You can do mountains if you're in the mountains. You can do cityscapes if you're in the city. You can make the art for your funeral home look like it was taken somewhere near your funeral home. And I think that's huge. And the reason that I point that is one of the other policies that SCI talked about in their presentation. Part of when they're taking over these places is they're coming across, very, very, not just generic websites, but off-puttingly generic websites. Generic websites so generic they don't look like they're from where the funeral home is. And so it's something to consider, whether or not you use Tukios or you have access to AI. If I could kind of understand that people weren't comfortable taking their own photos, it is something that takes practice to make sure you don't have, a telephone pole sticking through the middle of your photo, or, some guy flipping the bird out of a car that you didn't notice when you took the photo, and then you can't use it. So the AI generation for kind of the ancillary aspects of your website and business are worth at least looking into. I think that it's great that they're there, and you can check out the Tukio story and the SCI story in the show notes. There's a company called Meadow that just got some coverage for, disrupting the funeral industry. And I said some snarky things about them on the internet, and I will say them now. And it's like, hey, I have this great idea. People have trouble booking funerals online. No one is solving this problem. I'm going to step up and solve this problem. I am exhausted by these. And it was cool, really, 4 years ago, and I don't wanna be a hipster about it, but there were some people who had some genuine problems, and they were able to bring their tech knowledge to bear to solve them. I've interviewed many of these people, and I know, and I think that they have done a great job at moving funeral service toward the 21st century and just a recognizing that sometimes families may not want to come into the funeral home. But the last several months, we've been kind of beleaguered by disruptors. And one of the things, like, no one is doing this is a clue that this person hasn't done any research. And um, what really bothered me, though, was that someone gave him $9 million to do it. And so the $9 million got my attention, and I looked into it. And this is a direct cremation business. That's genuinely all it is. It's a direct cremation business with a venue booking app embedded in it. So you can book your direct cremation and your celebration of life at the nearby winery of your choice at the touch of a button. And I just was astounded that they bothered at first. And more than that, I was offended by the notion that this was novel. And I was offended by the notion that either they think, when you say something that's not true, I always say that, do you think I'm stupid or are you stupid? And this is with the tech bro class, I always feel like they think you're stupid. So that's a problem, but it's also something to not take seriously. So they served 400 whole families in February and expect to triple their business throughout 2026. And they've got all this, private equity money coming in to keep them occupied. This is the guy he was a functionary of some sort at Stripe, and he got money from DoorDash. And that's all I really have to say about that, except that you'll remember from earlier in this conversation that SCI is doing something that's not radically different, right? They're dumping a bunch of training into Preneed. Meadow has their 30% of their revenue is in Preneed. So SCI is dumping a bunch of money into Preneed, a bunch of money into these celebrations of life centers, and a bunch of money into their tech. And so these two things look very much alike. Like the future that they believe is going to have a lot more lines around Chick-fil-A and a lot fewer, dinner reservations at a decent restaurant. So that is something that not only you need to be aware of, but it's happening so much faster than we probably thought it was going to. But I'm a writer, and I've seen it coming for a long time. I'll have a separate essay on that for Monday. But don't sleep on this idea. This is just taking a cue from the market. And the difference, I think, between what SCI and Meadow is that there are actual funeral professionals involved, which isn't something that, that the tech people are really, very interested in, and that's, I think, where the experiential difference is going to matter. Saying experiential because it's a marketing word and understanding the need for experience are two very, very different things. And finding a way to parse that difference is going to be critical, I think, for independent funeral homes going forward. But anyway, link to those stories in the show notes. And now, here's the rest. I reported on a couple of stories that I will have linked to in the show notes this year, and I just wanted to hit on them real quick. The one, I think the most important and the most exciting, and the one that I thought would get a little bit more play than it has, is that electric cremation has come to Detroit. And maybe to the U.S. I spoke with Noni Green. She is a veterinarian, and she claims to have purchased and operate the first electric cremator for pets in the country. If she's not the first, she's one of the first. It's something that's new and slow coming over, but she's really excited about it, and I think for good reason. When I spoke with her, and again, all of this is in the story, one of the things that she was really interested in was finding a way to be greener, but not through alkaline hydrolysis, which wasn't something that appealed to her for where she was. And I think that the idea of electric cremation kind of captured her imagination for this kind of middle reason that, when you think about it, harkens back to some of the things we were talking about that consumer preferences report, consumer disposition preference report from Cana, where it talked about the cremation paradox, how people are accepting cremation, but a lot of times they think they would have chosen something different if something different was available. And cremation is everybody's second choice, but very few people's first choices. And among the reasons for that were the ecological concerns surrounding cremation. I don't know if I think old crematories are more a problem than new crematories, and I wonder what the effect of having some success, even with pet cremation, with electric, can do for the US as a market. Now, this cremator that Dr. Green brought is below actually European standards, which means, US standards won't get to it in our lifetimes. But more important, it makes people feel better about their footprint. And she expects she's leasing right now. Once she buys a building, once she's successful enough to buy a building and add maybe another cremator or two, she is hoping to throw some solar panels on the roof and call it a day, and call it, a net zero for her carbon footprint. Nearly, the particles, obviously go someplace. And this is for small animals, only smallish animals, no horses, I guess is what I want to say. It's 250 pounds is kind of the top weight that these cremators can handle. But, she went to the Netherlands and she test drove one and she came home with it. I mean, not in her luggage, obviously. And it was way more money than she had to pay if she had taken pretty much any other option. But for her, it was part of this. I want to pioneer in some way. I want to try something that isn't really being done here. And I mean, all power to her for it. But anyway, there's a link to that story for sure in the show notes. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed a bipartisan legislative package on Tuesday that was designed to modernize and accelerate the process of certifying deaths in the state. This, according to the Michigan Advance. And I reached out to the Michigan Funeral Directors Association just to see, how they felt about it, because a lot of times I think the state wants to help and is helping in the wrong ways, or is not really participating in the way that it could with industry. But they said that they endorsed this move, that making the death certificate retrieval process easier is, always in everyone's best interests. So in addition to establishing an online platform for filing death certificates, it also allows non-medical examiners, so regular physicians, can sign off on death certificates, and the billing is going to be easier and digitized. And I think this is, we'll talk in the future about the move toward, digitization of the dying process, right? So it's not just death certificates. There are places where they're looking to do trusts and wills. There are places where they're looking to do all of the executor type stuff digitally. I don't know if I'm ready to hand over the management of I'm not leaving anything behind, let's be honest. But I don't know if I had stuff to leave behind, if I would be happy to throw into Chat GPT and say, hey, you take care of this for me. I'm going to go die now. So I'm not sure this is I wonder how quickly this should go. And I've always been a tech forward guy, but increasingly, and it really, I don't trust the people. It has nothing to do with the technology. It has to do with people saying, "Oh, well, I've solved this problem because I'm superior." And really, what you are is a tech bro that someone threw $9 million at to make him stop whining. So those are my concerns with AI. I'm again, it's that not the technology, it's the promise makers behind the technology that I do not, and I think ought not be trusted. But anyway, the nice story to this this Michigan story rather. Link to that in the show notes. So I didn't really report on the bad acts embezzlement, also in Michigan. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's this guy that got caught. At first, he was caught having defrauded maybe 55 people out of about $200,000. But all that really did was kick off an audit, and people are like, "Hey, wait, is my Preneed safe with him?" And then they checked, and it was not. So he pled guilty recently, and I'm sorry, he did not plead guilty. He pled no contest recently to defrauding about 204 people, 204 people out of $1.1 million. And under the plea agreement, he'll be giving all or most of the money back. So he didn't spend it, or he spent it places where he could get it back. He was caught by regulators. Regulators were part of the reason he got caught. But I think that increasingly people who are floating their Preneed really would be wise to stop or to start stopping maybe, because this looks like, it looks like a classic case of not putting it in escrow as is required by law and using it to operate. This happens in almost every case. Almost every case is essentially people taking their Preneed money and using it to expand the business or to, pay their employees and things like that, with the idea that when the person shows up, they'll get the funeral essentially for free, right? Who's hurt if I spend the money now? Well, you're hurt if you get caught doing it. And you're even more super hurt if you get hit by a truck and whoever gets your business doesn't know that they're supposed to be giving funerals away for free because you already spent the money. So it's a really interesting problem that keeps coming up. What I think is noteworthy about this is he was arraigned in November, which seems like a blinding speed for this kind. Usually these things drag out. And so I guess if he gets any credit at all, it's for doing the no contest plea and not spending the $1 million paying his lawyers to try to keep him out of jail, and then not having the $1 million to give back to the people from whom it was misappropriated. So anyway, link to that story in the show notes. That is pretty much it for this week. I do want to make one quick appeal. If you have a story that you think needs to be told, I think I would like to tell it. So if you have any stories to share, if you have any news to share, if something's going on in your state or in your town or in your funeral home that you think other people should know and maybe could benefit from, shoot me an email. I am bytonyrusso@gmail.com. That is bytonyrusso@gmail.com. The rest has been an On Death Care production. It was sponsored by our paid subscribers. To be a paid subscriber, you can just go to ondeathcare.com and find out. All subscriptions are free. Paying is voluntary, but if you pay, you are one of the sponsors of the show. So thank you to my sponsors for letting me do this. I get to do this. And as I mentioned, in my essays last week, getting to do something is really the best that you can ever hope for. So thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for hanging out. And I will check in with you next time.